Welcome to the Heartland Journals podcast with your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the show. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and pass it around. We only grow with your help. Thanks for doing it. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today, we are talking with special guest Alabama's Pete Riehm. Mr. Riehm is a longtime, unabashed conservative commentator who co-founded the Common Sense campaign Tea Party in 2009 and ran for Congress in 2012. Since 2011, he has hosted a weekly radio show called Common Sense Radio. He has been writing a political column on the website renewamerica.com since 2015. Riehm also spearheaded a push several years ago to get the phrase "In God We Trust" posted in civic buildings throughout coastal Alabama. Everyone knows that I'm a conservative guy and I don't have to tell anyone that or flaunt it, Riehm said, but I have friends across the political spectrum, particularly in civic and veterans groups. They might say we disagree with Pete about certain things, but we know that he will be fair and genuine on what he says. 2020 Mobile Area Veteran of the Year, recognition for his military service and ongoing community service. Thank you for your service, sir. One of the hottest legislative battles in Alabama ahead of the November 8th midterm elections last year, Pete took on the Senate seat held for the past 25 years by Democratic Senator Vivian Figures. In a state with few Republican opportunities to flip a Democratic district given the GOP's supermajority status in the legislature. Unfortunately, it failed. We'll talk all about that. Pete started broadcasting Common Sense Radio weekly in 2011 and syndicating his Common Sense column weekly since 2015. Blessed more than he deserves, Pete is married to Deborah, his long-loving wife, has 3 grown children, Jessica, married to Nathan Hayter, Justin, and Jenny, an adopted son, Trent, and 3 grandchildren, Alex, Odin, and Torin. Let's check in with Mr. Riehm. Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We had thunder and lightning move through, but it's blue skies now. How are things in Alabama?
The same, blue skies, a little bit of clouds, but it's getting hot.
Getting hot, 90-something degrees, you said. All right.
That's right.
Well, we are talking Bama today, so thanks for coming on here with me. So Alabama has a Republican trifecta and a Republican triplex, which means a trifecta, the Republican Party controls the offices of governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and both chambers of the state legislature. There are 25 of us Republican states that do that. The triplex is a state government that holds the governor, Attorney General, and Secretary of State. With those 3, you can do just about anything you want. My Tennessee and your Alabama do, and my old Washington and my old California, they do too, but for the Democrats. As a longtime commentator and candidate for office yourself a couple times, we'll talk about that. Have you been able to define for yourself what a rhino is?
What a rhino is? Well, a Republican in name only, I think it kind of comes in 2 versions. One is it's a former Democrat that's really still a Democrat, right? They're still very liberal. They don't have conservative core convictions. And then there's another version that I think we tend to overlook, and sadly, there's more of them in elected office than you expect, and that's just the moderate, mediocre, bland person who is trying to get an elected office solely for ego, right? They don't have any real core convictions. They're just there because they want to have the title. They want to be invited to chamber lunches and go on trips and stuff like that. So they're not really hardcore on any kind of or devoted to any particular philosophy. They will go with whatever the last lobbyist that talked to them said.
Yep. Would you say Kay Ivey, Will Ainsworth, President of the Senate, or Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter, all Republicans, of course, show signs of rhinoism?
Oh yeah, uh, Governor Ivy is an old Democrat. I mean, she's an old Democrat and still has a lot of that in her, and so is Speaker Ledbetter. Um, Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth is a Republican, and we're hoping he's going to be a better strain of Republican, but he talks a good game, but we haven't always seen the walk, shall we say.
Did any of them come out strongly in support of you running against a longtime Democrat to try to get more conservatives to join their ranks? Or were they more in line with the Democrats and didn't want somebody like you? Uh,
Well, yeah, they're not going to stick their neck out. There's a couple of things there. You're referring back to when I ran in 22. I got redistricted. I lived on the edge of the district. Next thing I know, I find myself in District 33, which was a heavily Democrat leaning district. And there were a couple of people who really encouraged me to run. But in general, you are correct. There was two dynamics. One is the people in Montgomery and the Republican Party, they are not going to risk anything on a long shot or stick their neck out too much unless you're really close. So if you've got an uphill battle, they're not sticking their neck out. So we didn't get a lot of support in that way. And then the other thing is, at the end of the day, they don't want somebody who doesn't toe the party line. They don't want somebody who challenges the establishment. So in my case, it was a very big uphill battle, and I would be one of those not party line anti-establishment types. So they had little or no motivation to really get out and help me back in that race.
Yep. I've heard this story quite a bit, so I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm just trying to put it all together.
Yeah.
Like there is two parties within one party, and it's called the establishment slash rhino slash conservative MAGA, and we'll get into more deep at that in a second. And I've been observing politics about as long as you, but new to the South. So I'm thrilled to hear your take on this. I've developed a working theory that a southern rhino, where they don't grow naturally, assuming they didn't move here from Oregon or California, are really Dixiecrats. Do you think there's any truth to that brand of a Republican is really just a Reconstructionist era Democrat?
Pretty much, because most of the Democrats, the Republicans, Democrats became Republicans. The only reason they changed is because the demographics or the makeup of the electorate finally changed to the point you couldn't get elected as a Democrat anymore, right? Most of these people, if they could still get elected as a Democrat, they would do it. But there's a lot of parts, and that's driven a lot by national politics, right? That ideology drives it. But, there's a lot of places where if you're a Democrat, you cannot get elected. Baldwin County is one. They haven't had an elected Democrat in over almost quarter century now, about a quarter century. No elected Democrats in the whole county ever. And then you got some of the rural counties in Alabama, believe it or not, didn't really start shifting until 2010. Democrats were still fairly powerful, even though they were not nearly as, they would have nothing in common with a California or Washington State Democrat, but they still ran as Democrats, and they had a lot of the Democrat ideology, maybe not quite as liberal, but they only shifted because the electric got to a point where it would not run. You couldn't get elected. So you're in a sheriff in a small or a school board or maybe a state representative in a small rural county in Alabama. And starting around 2010, it shifted where if you're a Democrat, you're not getting elected unless it's a Democrat district per se. Other than that, all of them, you're not getting elected. So they just changed parties.
There you go. Certainly not Reagan Revolution populists, more of a Ford Chamber of Commerce, big government, low tax type. Maybe the low taxes, at least it used to be.
Maybe.
Most of the rest of the country, especially Yankees from Boston, think of Alabama as Birmingham in the 1960s and Martin Luther King on the Selma Bridge marching for civil rights, and now, frozen in a time capsule only seen in seventh grade US history books, if they even go to their history books. What is your assessment of a party of Lincoln, super majority, and steering of Alabama post Civil Rights Act of 1964, going on 60 years now?
Well, that's an interesting situation here because we are far from Birmingham in the 60s, and actually I live in Mobile, and Mobile, for I guess a lot of different reasons, the demographics are a little bit different here, but we're 50-50 black and white. And if you go back to that time period, Mobile didn't have the riots and violence in the 60s that the northern parts of Alabama did. And I think we have built more on that, and that we actually get along pretty well with the black Democrats, and that's kind of what's happening in the state. Let me come back to that, but it is not. I guess what I'm getting at is I think Alabama is a lot less racist by any measure than any Yankee state, and I know Yankees are probably going, "What?" And I will, and the reason is we know each other. We're still small towns and communities, and you might be a Democrat, but I know you. I've been to church with you. I've been to school with you. I've seen you in town. And in the South, we're big on manners and being polite to one another. So even if we disagree, we're still quite polite to one another. And I think we built on that. Now, what first happened as Democrats realized they had to become Republicans, and you're seeing this, is it started looking like the Democrat was become a black-white party, right? Because Democrats in Alabama are, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know the majority of elected Democrats are now black. So there was a little bit of a odd dynamic going on. Are we going to become a black-white party? Well, there's still some white Democrats elected, not a lot, but now we're seeing more elected black Democrats. So that's where it's starting to even out, where it's not on race, it's on ideas. And so I would say to the people in, as you put it, Yankees, they probably would be shocked to come down to the Deep South and see what the racial dynamic actually is. Matter of fact, I hear this story all the time because remember back in the 50s, 60s, a lot of black families, because of there was racial oppression. Also, jobs were more plentiful in the industrialized Chicago, Detroit. And now some of those families are coming back. But they grew up in Chicago or Detroit or Cleveland. And I anecdotally, I hear this regularly. Black families, they move back down here and they're shocked that it's not racist, and that actually it's much more polyglot and integrated, and people get along better in the South than they did in the big city they came from.
I found the same thing to be true. The only problem was they didn't teach us that. You didn't hear that on CNN. Do you think Alabama embraced LBJ's ideas of the new society and its tenets to end segregation in public accommodations, public education, and federally assisted programs? And it also established that, of course, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, like a Reconstruction extension hooked on DC money. Do you think it actually was a force for bad that it was rejected in Alabama?
Well, I think there were some people that rejected it, but I think just like the devious intention and strategy they had, it was just a new form of slavery, that we're going to make you dependent. We're going to give you all these things to make you dependent. We're not trying to help you. We're trying to make you dependent. And I think that's where you started seeing a little bit of divergence in Alabama, where you started seeing people start going, Democrats who didn't believe in that, rejected that, started migrating to the Republican Party. It was very slow, and I don't know how familiar you are with this. It was very, very slow at first. And the where it went was we started electing in the 60s, and actually in Mobile was one of the first, started electing Republican congressmen. And that started to spread slowly over the decades. And then we started electing Republican governors, but the legislature was solidly Democrat till 2010. Took
Yeah.
the local areas a lot longer to catch up to that.
Same here, same in Tennessee. Does Kay Ivey, a Republican since 2002, the 38th Alabama state treasurer from 2003 to 11, and the 30th lieutenant governor of Alabama from 2011 to 2017, born in Alabama, went to Auburn. Go War Eagles. Turns out 80. Oh, she turns 80 years old this year. America turns 250, FYI. What's your relationship? What's her relationship with MAGA and patriotic veterans?
It's not a very good relationship. She likes to get out there and say that she's the most conservative, and she's this folksy old grandma shtick out there, like she's really just another one of us, makes commercials shooting a gun or something like that. But when the rubber meets the road, she is not very conservative, but she's not friendly to MAGA. You can go back to during COVID. Sorry, I had to reject something there. But during COVID, she went.
We lost your video too when you did that.
Let me see if I get my video back. But during COVID, what she did was, I don't know why this thing doesn't want to come right back. But during COVID, we did the still the more liberal lockdown, right? Oh, we got to lock everything down. And she was letting the unelected state health officer make all these dictates to us. And we're looking around at places like Florida leading the way going, why? We're supposed to be deep red Alabama. Why are we not leading the way on freedom and liberty and saying that this is BS? And she even she's got a couple of times she got out there in public and she bought into the propaganda where she made some pretty pointed comments that the reason this is continuing is because of the unvaxxed. That the unvaxxed would just go ahead and get their vaccinations, that we could maybe loosen up on some of these restrictions they had. She also fought tooth and nail. There was a group called Alabama Health Freedom where workers were being fired and penalized around the state for refusing to get the vaccination. And they were asking the legislature to protect their rights. And let me tell you, she gave no help to that. No help, no lip service. She didn't get in on that. We did get a very watered down bill done, but sorry about that. But we got a very watered down bill done, and she was not helping.
Yeah, COVID and the health departments of every state seem to be the great exposer of all of these true latent, I guess, progressive democratic tendencies to rule in a different way than we would think of what a Democrat or certainly a Republican was, especially if they were a Republican. I came from a very liberal state, Washington State. Our Democratic governor kept emergency powers for over 1,000 days, almost 1,000 days. Not a county had COVID. Totally expected, would expect nothing less from him. Kay Ivey, different story. Governor Lee in Tennessee, different story. You would not expect that. More like a DeSantis. Is she term limited out? And is there anyone that looks DeSantis or Trump-like on the horizon? Or could it be more Idaho's Brad Little or Ohio's DeWine type next? Also rhinos, in my opinion. Or even a weak Texas Governor Abbott type next for Alabama.
Unfortunately, well, that she's out. She's too old, and she's actually, if anybody really did their homework, she's Alabama's Biden, because she's got all sorts of infirmities. She's very frail, and I don't know about dementia, but she's cognitively, she's missing a step here or there. And she's very vindictive and petty, but she's probably not going anywhere. She's going to serve out her two terms, but she's done. She's term limited out. She's not running. And like I said, she's kind of like Biden. She doesn't have it in her to run another time anyway. Um, we tend to always get what we get in the legislature is the people in Alabama, as a lot of places, are fooled into thinking as long as you vote Republican, you're good. R, do you see the R? You're good. You're safe, right? It's not the case. So as we go forward, it looks, and that's why I said Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth, now he talks pretty good game. And it sounds like he would be a lot more conservative than she is, for sure. But I'm not convinced that he would be more of a Ron DeSantis, or like if you get Vivek Ramaswamy in Ohio, somebody like that, who will be a very MAGA type, very conservative, very bold, cutting edge, leading the charge instead of following it, years later. I don't know if he would do that. And I say that for this reason. Earlier this year, and this was part of when you asked about Governor Ivey, she has an awful relationship with the veterans because she sold us out this year. We had a perfectly good system for the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, and the State Board of Veterans Affairs have been working since 1945, implemented by returning World War II veterans, where we had a board and we had a say. And the mental health care monopoly didn't like the influence and power and money that was going through the ADVA to the veterans. They wanted that to go through the mental health care, where it's corrupt and everybody gets to steal part of that money. So long story, but they had to get veterans out of the way, because veterans were starting to have success and meriting some of the mental health care money coming from the federal government. So the long story, I'm going to paraphrase way down. They colluded with the governor to gut the State Board of Veterans Affairs, which used to be nominated and put in by the veterans, and then the veterans hired the Alabama Veterans Affairs Commissioner. She gutted all that, took their power away, took their authority away. Now she hires it directly, and it's a political appointment. I'm saying all that because she sold us out, took away our power, our authority. That's a whole nother story. Could be a podcast. During that time, Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth came out strongly in support of us and said that this was wrong. Okay, we appreciate that. But in practice, what happened? The bill was being jammed through the Senate, and he went into the Senate and said, I am very opposed to this. Is wrong. I don't think this should happen. And then he had to leave to go to his son's baseball game or something. And right after he left, they passed it. So,
wow, that I've seen that before.
So what does that tell you? Does that mean they let him play both sides? Or is he just not that strong? I just have my question. I don't know what the answer is.
He must be running for election, and they didn't want him to have to put his name down on the vote they wanted. Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Right. Now, the one thing that, let me finish on this, is if Senator Tuberville runs for governor, then we might get that truly MAGA, very bold conservative. And, when he first showed up on the scene, we were going, who's it? What? We weren't sure, but I think he's done a very good job in Washington. And the reason he would be exciting in Montgomery in Alabama is he has no connection to that swamp. He is not beholden to any lobbyist up there. He doesn't even really know them. He didn't spend any time in Montgomery. He's a total outsider, and he says what he thinks. So I would be very interested to see a Governor Tuberville go in there and clean that swamp, because he has no relationships to protect up there.
We'll definitely keep our eye on that. And they talk about Saban taking his place, which I don't think he would be very happy in DC, end up like Bill Belichick with a 10-year-old girlfriend or something. But that's my opinion. One of the most fascinating races last year for me, and I'm a geeky wonk, as you're probably seeing, was the Alabama Senate. The God, Bugs Bunny, and Chuck Norris were among the write-in votes that played a role in electing a Democrat to the U.S. Senate in Alabama for the first time in a quarter century. More than 22,000 write-in ballots were cast on December 12th, according to the Alabama Secretary of State's office, a greater number than the 20,715 vote margin by which Democrat Doug Jones beat Republican Roy Moore. U.S. Rep Mo Brooks looked like the most conservative MAGA one to me. What was Alabama? Were they not taking it seriously enough to give DC another Democrat?
Well, I there's a couple of things on that, particularly back on the Roy Moore thing, and those taught me some things about the electorate. The electorate likes conservatives, right? They want you to be conservative, but for some reason you have to have the right balance in your presentation. If you're perceived as a bomb thrower, they kind of back away. There seems to be we want you to be the conservative. We want you to have decorum, and you're right. We want you to be reserved in the way you do it. We don't want you to go and just beat the tar out of the other guy or be too bold or too brash. At least that's what it seems to happen. So when you have somebody being very, very forceful, sometimes you see the electorate goes for the more, not moderate, but just more stable, level-headed, even-handed, whatever you want to call it. At least that's a theory. I don't know that for sure.
That sounds like
Now,
they would want the prom king more than they want like the guy who was in the most clubs and maybe not as it's like a cult of personality almost. Like we want somebody who's just, plain vanilla. We don't want any hot sauce or Cajun spice on that.
yeah, we want you to know you're wearing the right jersey, but we don't want you to flaunt it too much. Now, the Judge Moore thing, I might get in trouble for saying this with my friends, and I think he lost. He fighting the establishment, and I think he lost because he didn't run the right campaign. In other words, when he won the primary, he had the conservative Christian Constitution right, whatever you want to call it. He had it locked up. But there's still big money and establishment out there. And when you get to that point after the primary, you have to tack a little bit to the center. And you don't really have to tack so much to the center. The way I put it is, you've got to go to the powers that be and say, look, I am very conservative, but I'm not crazy. You can work with me. And Judge Moore kept campaigning to the same people but he kept campaigning to his base. He didn't go to the Chamber of Commerce people and the establishment people and say, look, I've got some convictions and I'm more conservative, but I'm not crazy and I can work with you. You got to give them some sort of reassurance that they can work with you.
He didn't build any bridges or consensus building. He just decided, I am me, and you either take it or leave it. And they said, okay, we'll leave it.
Well, and that's, you would think that the deep red state would just go, okay, we're going with that, but they didn't, right? And part of that. And then Mo Brooks did that to a lesser extent. He was doing very well, but when he got around, and I've done this, you've seen it, and you've probably seen it. Your adversaries, they can still respect you, right? If you can be somewhat civil. Civil's not the right word, but approachable, right, to them. And those things were lost. And he got painted as the radical right crazy. So there was similar dynamic, more so with Judge Moore.
And you're also supposed to represent your constituents. So if you have some crazy ideas on an issue, but your people that vote you in don't, you have to say, well, that's okay. I go with them as opposed to what I think. So let's work together and make them happy. I get it. You get it. Apparently he didn't get it. What about your other new senator, Katie Britt? Is she MAGA even a little bit?
I think to a degree. She got in there because she just worked her tail off. That's one thing we saw here, right? It wasn't just ideas. She was all over this state working her tail off.
But the old retail politics, the lost art of retail politics.
She did it. She was everywhere. And she proved to be better on the stump than Mo Brooks. He came across as too much of a curmudgeon, old man like me. He was kind of cranky. Yeah, just too much, which when you get to be an old man, you appreciate that. You like the other cranky guy, right? Yeah, tell him, right? But you got to remember, you got a whole bunch of other younger voters. You got women who don't have the same experiences, and you've got to be able to appeal to them too. I think she just outworked him on the campaign, did better retail politics.
I think that's great because they forgot who they're sending them to go work with. Would you rather have cranky Mo Brooks up there with Mitch McConnell, who's basically in a coma, and John Thune and Nancy Pelosi, who's in her 80s, or the young, fresh uh, person like a Katie Britt, who no one's going to listen to? We'll see. I mean, the longer
But
she's
you
there, the more.
also,
Go ahead.
if you're in Alabama, you also got to remember that Katie Britt inherited the power structure and backers of Senator Richard Shelby, who, although a former Democrat, you know, he was the kind of Republican when he was on your side, it was awesome. And when he was not on your side, you're like, I can't believe he's still doing this. But the one thing you got to credit Senator Shelby, he amassed bone crushing power and would use it. And she inherited that. So she benefited from that. I mean, she didn't just come in empty handed off the street, she had a big backing behind her.
Yeah, the machine is always there. I rode in an elevator with him once, so yeah, I know he was a formidable dude. My old liberal, woke, evil hometown of Washington gave great power to the University of Washington. California, my other former hometown, the UC system is dominant in Sacramento. What roles do Alabama and Auburn play in the state capitol? I'm wearing my Auburn dad shirt. Montgomery, how do they act up there in Montgomery? That's where the capital is for you liberals listening.
Um, I don't really see Alabama or Auburn weighing too heavily on Montgomery politics. Now, they make sure that the state takes care of them and they're funded. And that's not a hard sell because everybody, as you know, we're that state where, if you move in Alabama, you got to declare at the state line. Are you Alabama or Auburn, right? You got to pick. I mean, so it's not a hard sell to get Montgomery to make sure that those two universities are always taken care of. But I don't see them play into politics. In Alabama, it's big business that calls the shots. When the Democrats had it, it was the Alabama AEA, the Alabama Education Association, right? They called the shots on everything. I mean, literally, they had a say on every piece of legislation. So we got them out. We voted the Democrats out in 2010, and we thought, okay, now the Republicans and Liberty can ring, and we can start really get moving forward on reforms and stuff. But what we got was another one-party state where now the BCA, the Business Council of Alabama, calls the shots. And they have something to say on every piece of legislation. And don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily have anything against these companies, but there are several really big companies. And I work well with them. I'm in business and I do business with these people. And on business, they're great. But Alabama Power, Regions Bank, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Alpha, the insurance company, they run the state. They run the state. Their lobbyists pretty much run the state. Their lobbyists don't lose. So if that big business is either for or against your legislation, your passage is pretty much whether they're for or against it. Not how much you work and how much you convince your legislators. It's them.
It's interesting because the reason I brought up the two universities and compared it to the other ones, and I could have thrown in Harvard and Yale and the rest of them around the country, is the federal funds that direct them, that keep them basically floating. It's not about tuition. It's not about how many kids are enrolled and if they're getting A's or B's or C's. It's about the NIH, all the money that comes from the federal government that keeps these folks doing it. And then apparently, based on what you just said, in Alabama, they haven't figured it out yet. They don't care so much. It's still the good old fashioned business makes the state run.
The problem with the university is actually thriving. And what happens is, the interesting thing is the left coast and northeast coast kids, more and more of them are coming to Alabama and Auburn because they still get a pretty good education there.
I hatched
So,
one.
I
I
mean,
know.
that's a fascinating dynamic. I don't know the exact number, but I think there's more out of state kids. I don't know about Auburn, but I think there's more out of state kids at Alabama than there are in state now,
Well,
which is,
they figured out they also pay more, so that's always a good thing too.
and they pay more, so they get them in. Now, my only problem with the universities is the Board of Regents on both those universities is pretty much dominated by good old Alabama conservative Christian constitutionalist folks. And I'm wondering why there's still wokeness on both those campuses, and why do they allow that? Why do the regents of those two universities? I mean, we're not nearly as bad as, UC Berkeley or Columbia or something like that, or Harvard, but the cancer's there too. And that puzzles me. Why? Because I know some of these people on these boards. Why do they allow that?
It's a Department of Education. They don't want a civil rights lawsuit coming their way because they'd rather spend the money the right way on things you just mentioned than to have to fight it with lawyers that are usually from New York against other lawyers from New York, and that's not an Alabama value. So I know this. We have the Frist family that sold HCA hospital chains to become the richest Tennesseans. Yours is Jimmy Rain. And according to
Yep.
Forbes, at 1.5 billion, Alabama's only billionaire. I was surprised by that. He's founder of Great Southern Wood Preserving, the Yellow Fella. Does he flex any muscle down there?
Yes, I know of it, but I haven't really encountered it on any of the legislation that I've been involved in. But I know he does because I hear about him and what he says. I know I think he plays a pretty big role at BCA, but I haven't had any particular issues to encounter him.
Okay, so he doesn't get involved in every piece of legislation like you just said.
No, I don't think he gets involved in every piece, but he does carry a big stick up there, like the big veterans battle we just had. They didn't get real involved, but it was all behind the scenes, put it that way. They weren't out in front. I mean, the dirty work is not done in the daylight. It's done in the dark.
Yeah. Alabama, just because it's hot and sunny doesn't mean it's different than the rest of the country or the world. That is how things get done.
Look, I think Alabama may be the worst because everybody goes, oh, Louisiana, Rhode Island, they're the most corrupt states or at least that's what you hear anecdotally. Louisiana, Rhode Island, they're the most corrupt states in the union. And I've lived in both, and it's like, well, yeah, they are pretty corrupt, but that's because they literally do it right in front of you in the daylight, and they actually tell you. I think Alabama might be worse because we are very polite to you, and if you say something untoward, we'll clutch our pearls like, I can't believe that, but in Alabama, there's just every bit as much as corruption in Louisiana and Rhode Island. We're just doing it behind your back.
Interesting. Do you remember when Kanye West said George Bush doesn't care about black people in the aftermath of Katrina?
Yes.
It was actually the west coast of Alabama he was talking about, accusing Bush of bungling the response on purpose because wealthy land developers have been trying to chase the poor blacks out or something like this. Do you think Kanye had a point, and now 11 years later, did wealthy land developers move in, if not proving him right, at least taking advantage of the disaster? Because I was there in the Redneck Riviera, and boy, you cross that Florida line and it was not being cleaned up.
Yeah, no, the entire upper Gulf Coast. No, I don't believe any of that at all because I would tell you, I was living in Mobile when Katrina hit, and I owned a lot of property in Mississippi at the time. I will tell you, I will absolutely disagree with it because the federal effort, for the most part, focused on New Orleans, which is a predominantly black and Democrat city. That's where they're focused. I'll tell you who rebuilt Mississippi and coastal Alabama was rebuilt by the churches and civic groups. That's who came down, just like you're seeing with Hurricane Helene up in the aftermath up in the Carolinas. It is the private groups that
Americans
have raised
Purse
money.
and the Amish, yeah.
That's right. They showed up. I mean, I remember because I was retiring from the Navy and I had a construction company, so I was out. I mean, I literally was retiring from the Navy as Katrina had a construction company, right? And I was out in the workforce, going to Lowe's every day, and every day you saw trucks with trailers from Michigan, from Wisconsin, from Ohio, from Oklahoma, from Virginia. And these were mostly churches, people from churches. And some of them were just individuals who were semi-retired and they had the stuff, they packed up their gear and they came down. And that's what rebuilt the coastal Mississippi and Alabama, not the federal government. George Bush was plenty focused on New Orleans.
Good. All right. I'm glad you could tell us that. So Sumter, Greene, Perry are the three poorest counties with poverty rates in the 30s. Sumter is at 35%, unemployment 5%. How does your Republican government deal with the poorest counties?
They don't. Well, here's what happens with that. Now I am not intimately familiar with those counties, but most of the rural and very poor counties are Democrat counties. So they don't spend a lot of time out there. They don't worry about those counties. And part of it is, the Democrats there aren't like going and demanding their fair share because, they don't want to be seen as Republicans helping them because it would make Republicans look good. So they're not doing it. And a lot of times, as we see in blue cities, your Democrat leadership is incompetent or incapable. So they're just not doing it, right? And since they're all Democrats and there's no boats out there, the state doesn't spend much time out there. So I think in general, they just don't deal with them.
That's the Memphis story. Alabama is generally considered a poor state. I think you'd agree. 16% live in poverty. Alabama received 31.2% of its government revenue from federal transfers, higher than the national average of 26.5%. Tennessee ran some nullification bills, didn't expand Medicaid either, a few things here and there, threatened to return Department of Education funds if they kept telling us to teach wokeism 101. Have the Republicans there, the party of small government, right? Have they tried to actually do anything to wean themselves off the money from DC with all its strings attached, or they actually ask for more?
In education, they're not leaving because that's still driven. The AEA has figured out. It's kind of funny. The AEA, the Alabama Education Association, was taboo in 2010 for Republicans. They were the enemy. They only gave to Democrats. Well, go look in the last couple of elections. Who got a lot of AEA money? Republicans. They don't make a big deal about it, but it's very quiet. If you go look, Republicans are raking in a lot of AEA money. And it's funny, nothing changes in the education. We've been trying to get rid of Common Core for 15 years. The only thing they did was change the name of it. None of that. So we've done nothing statewide to get off of the federal largesse for education. The only place we've managed to hold the line is Alabama has not expanded Medicaid. And it's not for a lack of people in Montgomery wanting it. There are plenty of people who want Medicaid expanded. But there there's a couple of very, shall I say, there's a handful of Republicans holding the line on that. But the other Republicans are only resisting it because they know they would be hammered if they expand that, and they would probably lose an election. So really, it's the threat from the right in the primary, right? It's the threat from the right in the primary. But that's the only place that we've held the line that I can think of right now. Otherwise, we still want our federal money, and we'll comply with whatever, particularly in education. We haven't made any good changes there. Our education sucks. So do our prisons. So do our roads.
Tennessee's the exact same way. 20,229,466. Somebody took notes, dollars, 31% of your budget. That's not a little, $20 billion. Do you have fear Trump and Doge and this era of cost cutting out of DC will hurt those Alabamans or help it? Because
It would help
I
it.
mean, let's face it, Medicare is for poor people, and you just said that they don't even care about the Democratic counties that maybe are majority poor or whatever because that's not where the votes are.
You know what? There's better ways that they could do this and they could solve these problems in rural areas, but they're not interested. And as you know, the problem with Medicaid expansion is the federal government is like a drug dealer. We're going to give you some money we're going to pay to expand it this year, maybe next year, maybe the third year, but we're going to force you to be a blue state about the third, fourth, fifth year because you're going to have to raise taxes to cover the deficit of what you just expanded, to cover the Medicaid expansion, because we're going to stop paying for it.
That's the
And
carrot and stick approach. Yep, no, for sure.
so that's the only reason that the legislators is they know the game, and if they could take it and get away with it, they would. But they know we are still very much against that. And they say we're a really poor state. I live here. We're not a poor state. I would say our quality of life is just as good or better than anybody else's. We don't put up with a lot of traffic. We don't have a lot of nonsense. We got people, our people, do they go to the beach? Yes. Do they have boats and go fishing? Yes. Do they go on vacations? Yes. Some of them have real nice houses. Some of them have crappy houses. I mean, people pretty much have what they want to have. And there's people with lake houses and beach houses. I kind of don't buy that we're a poor state. Do we have some poor people? Yeah, we have poor people.
It would depend
But
on the
you don't have
matrix
to be
for
poor if
sure.
you don't want to.
Yeah, and the cost of living is lower, and it's not run down and smells like garbage or marijuana and pot and piss like Manhattan does. So you're doing fine.
Right.
And they would say they're probably like leaders of the pack. But unlike Tennessee, you have an income tax, still pretty
Yes.
low. Property taxes are still pretty low, about a 4% sales tax, which beats California's 7.25, which includes a 1.25% for local city and county funding. Again, whether you want to call yourself a poor state or not, how do you feel Alabama handles tax and spending? Like a
Well,
Republican or a Democrat?
the spending, we're more like Democrats. The taxing, we're still a relatively low tax state. And the biggest thing is our property taxes are super low across the country. So, I mean, I kind of can see where we have to have other taxes to do things. Like we just did about 5 years ago, they did a 10-cent tax on gas, which was a huge deal. But our roads suck, and we did need the infrastructure. Now, I think the people were kind of okay with that to a degree, the 10-cent increase, if you spend it all on roads, because that's where we need it, right? And so I think you can do those things sometimes, but that goes back to the Doge thing is, okay, we got to raise 10 cents on gas, gallon of gas, so we can improve the roads. Everybody goes, well, the roads suck, we got to do something. But really, when we look back, we should be looking back. Alabama's running surpluses all over the place. What are you guys actually doing with the money? How are we spending the money? Are we really getting our money's worth? I mean, you look at we have this bloated education budget, and our education sucks. How is that? Why do we keep putting more money in education and we don't get any better? That are the things that we should be asked for. How come we got a 10-cent gas tax and the roads are only marginally better than they were 5 years ago? My biggest one, because I was just in that battle, was state of Alabama spends mostly federal money, about $1.3 billion on mental health care every year in Alabama. 1.3 billion in Alabama. That's a big number. And we have the worst mental health care in the state. And I'm not just saying that by statistic. We can show you chapter and verse from veterans PTSD and lack of treatment, lack of drug addiction treatment and rehabilitation, lack of help for the homeless and all that. you don't have to go see a statistic. You just have to drive around town and you can see our mental health care sucks. Where is that 1.3 billion going? I mean, those are the things where we're like Democrats is we throw lots of money in every direction, but nobody can really tell you what we got for it.
Yep. Something happened to Alabama that I'd love to hear your opinion of. From 1880 to about 1980, 100 years, Alabama's legislative party competitive score went from 0 to 4%, meaning forget it, it's a lock, to 40%, 42% actually, in 1990, 10 years later. What do you think happened there post Reagan that gave the party more close races against Democrats and Republicans?
You mean how did the Republicans become more competitive?
Yeah.
You
After
know,
all that time, after 100 years of basically forget it, is 0 to 4% turnover.
I think what really, and I think this is not just Alabama. I think what started happening, remember the old thing, all politics is local?
Yep, that was Tip O'Neill who said it to Reagan.
And to a degree, that's true.
Well, Reagan was trying to
But
fight
I
the
don't
Cold
think so.
War
I
and
don't
win
think
it, but yes, you're right. That's true. It's true everywhere.
I don't think so that much anymore, right? I think when Tip O'Neill said it, what he was saying is, look, a Democrat, you might be a Republican, but if your Democrat's doing a good job and is moderate, you'll still put that guy back in because he's taking care of some of your local issues. I don't think we live in that world anymore. I think that started changing, and that's what started changing was the nationalization of issues, where Democrats kept going farther and farther left. And people said, man, I can't be on board with this stuff, to the point now, because of DEI and all other sorts of, and just Democrats have bad ideas and bad policies. It's not just bad ideas and policies, it's bad governance. Right? They're incompetent. They don't have anybody. Who can you point to? Where can you point to a Democrat-run place that you go, that's an example. Look at what they're doing. They're succeeding. They're doing well. In general, you can't. So I think that's what started happening back then with really the nationalization of issues, whether it was abortion or low taxes. We started. And maybe that was part of media getting more and more out there. We're seeing, you go back 100 years from radio, then to TV, and then you start get the more media, it makes us all closer. It makes the world smaller.
That's right, especially since they only report on LA, New York, and DC. Somebody in Mobile, Alabama is sort of like, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I don't care. I'm just going to go to work and raise my family. And then it happens without them. That brings me to how I found you. You write for this great website. Everyone check it out. Interested in Alabama news and politics. Seriously, well done. 1819 News, it's called. Alabama was admitted to the Union as the 22nd state in 1819, so that's pretty cool. Alabama needs a better brand of Republicans. May 14, 2025. A commanding majority of Alabama citizens are indisputably conservative and largely Christian. They hold traditional values and cherish liberty. So it stands to reason that Alabama would be a red state. However, when it comes to individual liberty, not so much. Tell us how your liberty is being threatened by the GOP in Alabama.
It comes down to anytime it's an individual liberty. The COVID was a good one, right? When it came to protecting the rights of people who didn't want to get the vaccination, the state was running under the fence. They did not want to deal with it. Big business said, no, don't touch it. And they did not want to deal with it. And we did get something, but it was watered down. Another one is school choice. We just talked about the fact that we have these huge bloated education budgets and trust funds, and we're spending more money than we've ever spent on education, and it still sucks. We're not getting what we want. So we wanted a little bit of school choice. And we've been talking about it for years. It's coming online this year in a tiny, tiny little bit, because they don't really want you to have school choice. They don't want you to really have a say in the education They still want the AEA still holds a lot of power. So it's crazy when you think, I think the number was maybe somewhere between 15 and 30,000 families may benefit from school choice this year. They haven't even figured it out yet. It's supposed to start this fall, but they haven't even figured it all out yet. But
Tennessee
those
did the
are the
exact
places
same.
they're not trying to
We had it may as
preserve
well
your
have been
liberty.
a mirror image. Tennessee did the exact same thing, rammed it through. 33,000 people applied for it. That's a big win. It's like, yeah, but there's like 2 million kids, so it's crazy.
Right. Well, why is it so limited? And even now, I mean, here we are, I mean, we're ending one school year, but they don't even have it figured out what to do for next school year.
They don't, and they won't. Yeah, you go on to say this is the recurring theme in Alabama politics. Big business, the lobbyists, and special interests always get what they want, but the hardworking taxpayers are told to wait. Some 15 years ago, the people demanded Alabama abandon the Common Core curriculum. That was a George Bush thing. The legislature drugged their feet and a decade later just renamed it to hide it. You alluded to that a second ago. I could cut and paste that article into Texas, Tennessee, Idaho, Kansas.
Yep.
Common Core was George Bush Jr., and had Trump not won his brother Jeb that implemented it in Florida, would have certainly expanded it. What has Common Core done to kids in public schools in Alabama?
Well, the crazy thing is, before Common Core, Alabama was actually working its way up where we would place in the mid 20s in reading and math. They implement Common Core and we drop back down into the 40s. And now there's been a little bit of resurgence because they've watered it down in some places, but nobody wanted it and the people could not have a say. We had no say. We had no say. They wouldn't listen to us. They nod a lot, and then they would do and I'm sure this is the same in every state. It's the famous tactic. You know what? The legislators will say, we're with you. I see your point, and we're working on that. We've got something in committee, but we got to do this and do this. And the long and short of it is they run out the clock. They say, we're working it. I got the ball. I'm carrying the ball. Maybe I got a second down, but they never get to a touchdown. They never, ever get to a touchdown on these things. They just run out the clock and act like they were on your side when they never intended to pass what you wanted anyway. I saw a decade of that with Common Core.
The largest factor is the fact that Alabama has been a one-party state for over 150 years. Democrats held unassailable power until 2010 when Republicans took over. Same exact thing and timing as Tennessee. But there's that Dixiecrat rhino problem again. And what they don't listen to me here in Tennessee yet is that you're going to lose it. You're going to be a Democratic controlled state again because your little super majority, as you love to fall back on and call it, is not very solid. They have more history than you do. Do you think Roll Tide Republicans are better able to course correct to conservative value voting again, maybe more so than even my volunteer state? And especially, could they lead the country and get it to DC2 out of Alabama, or is it always just going to be a follower, not a leader?
I wish I could say that would be the case, but I haven't seen that yet in Alabama. I mean, that's one of the frustrations. When you look at everything, we should be the most blazing deep red state leading the charge on every conservative reform and initiative, and we are not. We are lagging everybody out. I mean, there's blue states that have better education reform than we do, right? And it's because you cannot upset the establishment. The establishment says this or that. You cannot upset them. They're going to have it the way they want it for maybe reasons we don't always understand. So, or at least that's the way they look at it, that we don't understand. I just don't see anybody really coming up. There's a few. I think you alluded the danger I think we see. And part of it, let me just say, most of our leadership is former Democrats. I mean, the chief of staff, they're not called the chief of staff, but the guy who runs Speaker Ledbetter's office is the biggest Democrat operative in the state. That's who runs the Speaker's office for the Republican supermajority in the Alabama House of Representatives, right? So that's part of the problem. But I think the danger you were alluding to is there maybe for lack of a better word, some Freedom Caucus type Republicans in Alabama who may start to push back. Because the problem we have right now, whatever the leadership wants, they get. Because your rank and file elected official, Republican in Montgomery, is scared to death of the leadership. Scared to death. They will not buck the system, because if you buck the system, those $5,000 and $10,000 checks that will come automatically for your reelection from the lobbyists and the big business will stop coming.
Lose your
And then all of a
committees.
sudden you lose committee assignments. And then all of a sudden you can't get bridges or roads paved or any projects in your district. I mean, they will absolutely go after you and ostracize you. So it doesn't change. But there may be a core of Freedom Caucus people who will go against that establishment and stick their necks out. But the problem is, kind of like what you see in Washington, is there will be too small and unable to really affect change, because the people who hold all the power cards can still sort of squash you and wait you out.
Wow. It's so funny how it sounds so similar. You end with this wishful thought. Pray that true conservatives will run in 2026 and give Alabama a better brand of Republicans. Prayer is good. It's great, actually, but not a strategy. Like hope is not a strategy. Do you see a lot of better conservatives on the bench to knock off some of these rhinos, or think the power of incumbency will stick around in 2026?
We're looking for them. They're not a bunch of them out there. There's not a bunch of people out there jumping up to go do it. There are people around town around the state that are looking for those people, but there's not like a whole cadre of them. And like there's a couple and the ones that I'm talking about that could maybe be this core of a Freedom Caucus, it is a tiny minority. Right? There's, I think, 70 some Republicans out of 105 in the Alabama House. And maybe we get 7 at most that might be on this Republican caucus. I mean,
Yeah, rumor has it that the Freedom Caucus came to Tennessee to try to create one in our state house too, and it wasn't enough. They couldn't even bother, so they left. So, and I've been told, well, we're so conservative, they didn't need a Freedom Caucus. We're just Tennessee Republicans, but bullshit. Did you learn any insight into the Alabama Democratic mind when you took on Senator Figures? District 33 gave her 67% against a bona fide Republican, you, Navy and Marine veteran, which most red counties would love you. What would it possibly take to flip it?
Alabama is probably like all these other states. We out of 105 House districts and 35 Senate districts, maybe 1% are competitive. They are all designed to either be blue or red, period. I mean, my district, even though I got redistricted in and they changed the demographics, it was still almost 65% Democrat district. So we made the calculus that obviously somebody should run, they should challenge, they shouldn't be able to sail in. But we thought in 22 that, things are not going well for Democrats nationally. Nobody off election year, nobody at the top of the ticket, that the Democrats would not be motivated, but the Republicans who had been districted in would be very motivated, and that we would get huge turnout. They would have low turnout, and I would be able to convince a few Democrats to come my way, and we would squeak through. And we were wrong about that.
Well, you mentioned, I found it fascinating. You mentioned redistricting. So Baldwin County, the state's fastest growing county for the past 10 years or more, and Republican stronghold, now has a rare Democratic representative. Did they
for Spanish Fort?
Yeah.
For one town.
Did they California their Alabama? Like I always say, don't California my Tennessee with all
No,
the growth making them rich and woke like Austin, Texas and Seattle?
no,
Or did you just disenfranchise with a heavily Democratic block of votes after the redrawn district?
they disenfranchised Spanish Fort, Alabama. I won Spanish Fort, Alabama with 83%, the town. But that was a drop in the bucket to what was in Mobile, right? They
So
won it in Mobile. So they just disenfranchised Spanish Fort by just scooping, a few thousand voters and shoving them in with the heavy Democrat district in Mobile.
so why would the Alabama GOP allow that?
That's a good question. Why did they allow that? The people in Baldwin County were livid about that, but I think it's because the two parties have an amicable coexistence, and they just say, "Look, you want to fight over the districts, or you want to go ahead and have the elections where you get the seat." Because we could redistrict everything where they're all closer to 50-50, and we would have a bunch of competitive races. But I don't think either side wants that. I think they collude together and they carve it up and they go, okay, we got to make this a little bit of adjustment, but we're going to leave this a solid Democrat or a solid Republican, and you're going to win in the primary. Look at Alabama. The state politics, every election is won in the primary. There's almost never a contested race in the general election in the state of Alabama for a state office. They are done in the primary.
You mentioned Tip O'Neill, and that's how they do it with judges. They always have, always will. It's if you get a rock rib conservative judge up there like a Bork, you got to give away somebody who's super squishy on the other side in Alabama, which he could care less about because he's from Boston. So, to be fair, it was redrawn in 2022, and it added to Mobile, where you are, across the bay. Blakely and Grapevine Islands, I think they're called. But
Yeah.
folks that maybe hadn't heard of you yet. So incumbency, as we know, usually wins. 64% black, 55% make under $50,000. Do you think the press, after 50 years of all this crap, basically looked at Republicans as awful people like the DNC and CNN would have them believe? So no Republican would have had a shot after, well, you didn't go with the Kanye idea, but they basically were told that Republicans hate you, don't vote for them. And there you are running as a Republican. Why would they? Even if they don't know who you are, especially in the new areas across the bay.
I think there is something to that with the older generations, and meaning the older generations, let's say 45 and up, they tend to be much more stuck on their partisanship, right? I'm either Democrat or Republican and I hate the other party. The other party has nothing to offer. The younger people seem to be a lot more open-minded to it. But basically what I kind of saw was like the incumbent I was running against a dynasty family, right? Senator Figures, she took over that seat in like 1997 or 98 from her husband, who had had the seat for 15 years, and he had a heart attack, right? So this seat has been in that family for 50 years now. And now her son is our new congressman. That's a whole other thing when they redistricted some congressional districts here in Alabama. We actually did way better with the black Democrats than people have thought, because we campaigned. We went to the black areas. We campaigned. They told me afterwards that I scared the poop out of them, because we had a fish fry in downtown Pritchard. We had a rally in fish fry with 70, 80 people in downtown Pritchard, and they were like, "What?" We were making some inroads, but I think at the end of the day, to your point, I don't even know so much it was just that we hate Republicans. It was more of like an Auburn, Alabama thing. It was like this is my jersey. This is my team. You didn't do anything to get, I guess I failed in convincing them to give up their team. for a lot of them. But now there was a lot of pressure put on them, and I'll give you a quick anecdote about that. That fish fry I mentioned, I was going to have at the Elks Lodge on Africatown Bridge Road, which is a black Elks Lodge there in Africatown. And the guy, I went and talked to them. They were all good with it. And I said, look, I'll rent it or make a contribution. We'll have a fish fry here. We'll have a rally. And we went and put a banner up on that Elks Lodge in Africatown. That poor guy, that banner was up just a couple of days. He called me up. He sounded like he's almost years. He said, oh, man, I am getting such backlash. I know I made a deal. I'll stick with it. But if there's anything you can do, because, I mean, my phone is burning up and everybody hates me. I mean, I'm in trouble. So, I mean, the community he got from the Democrat Party, I mean, they went after him. And finally, I had the guy, I'd be like, look, I get it. You got to live there. Whatever happens in the election, you got to live there. These are people you know. So we moved it to downtown Pritchard. But it was somewhat tribal. They were like, no way are you going for the other team.
That says a lot. All right, only got time for a couple more. D33 that we're talking about is only 37% married. So the whole family values brand, likely not a factor there. Mississippi and Alabama rank number 1 and number 2 in America who believe in the Bible. Pew Research says with 86% of its adult population identifying as Christian, 77% being, quote, highly religious. I mean, that's something in 2025. Do the politicians in Montgomery and Kay Ivey lead like Christians would want them to?
Not really. I mean, they sort of sidestep all that up there, right? I think they stay away. Well, let me take that back. Every now and then they'll throw some red meat out to make us believe that they're very conservative. Yeah, we're going to do something about, no boys and girls sports or something like that. Something easy in Alabama. They'll throw something out like that, or something about abortion. They'll throw that out mostly to just say, hey, we're really conservative and really red. Not that they're really doing that much about it. I don't think Montgomery is that affected by it. But I will give you an example of there is power, though, from the churches and the clergy and the locally. And I'll give you an example in Mobile. We have a very good mayor, excellent mayor. It's his third term. He's not running for re-election. But a few years ago, and I'm sure I know how it happened, somebody convinced him he should appoint 2 LGBTQ plus ambassadors for the city. And I guarantee you there was some federal grant program where they had to check a box, right? So these are unpaid positions, and they wanted to appoint 2 LGBTQ plus ambassadors for the city. Well, I'm going to tell you, the preachers in this town, they wrote letters and they called for a meeting, and they went down there in force, and the mayor said, I made a mistake, and he got rid of that nonsense. So that power is there. Locally, I've seen it. I don't know how much it plays in Montgomery.
Okay, that's interesting. They're getting worn down because they have to do this just about every 3 weeks. But yeah, that's good that they did that. I believe that's exactly the reason that even though Alabama is one of the poorest states, either the poorest or one of them, let's just put it up there, the crime rate is only 18th. And most of that is assaults, not rapes and murders. Your strong Christian society has kept y'all safe. And as you started this show by saying y'all know each other. So that's, fantastic for Alabama still being that American Norman Rockwell type of place. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think to a degree it is because, I said we do know each other. But I mean, like I'm originally from Texas, and I got transplanted here about a quarter century ago. But my liberal Texas friends think that I'm a firebrand who's just slaying Democrats all day. Well, none of that's true. All my fights are with Republicans, number one, because they have the power. And I actually know most of the Democrats, and I'm friends with most of the Democrats. Matter of fact, I have Democrat elected officials are in my phone, their phone numbers. So that goes back to we kind of know each other, and there's every now and then we work. And actually, I would say when we had the big veterans thing, we got as much support from Democrats in Montgomery to protect the voice of veterans than we did Republicans.
3 years I've been saying, don't California my Tennessee, and I'm going to have to start saying, don't Texas my Tennessee, because not all of them are like you. They're actually pretty darn woke, and they come here and they get into legislation and they start making these crazy things. And you're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be the most conservative state. We kind of, like you said, there's an R next to your name. Well, there was a TX next to your name on your driver's license or your license plate. We have to agree that you're a good guy. Well, no, we're not John Wayne or Davy Crockett even. What are you working on in your journalism that we can keep an eye out for? A book, maybe?
No, no, I don't know. I don't have a book up there, although I've been writing a weekly column for over 10 years. And so the way I put it to some people, I said, well, I think I got enough material. I could put a book together if I wanted to, because I've been doing a weekly column for 10 years. The only book is maybe in my fantasy, but I do write a weekly column that is always put up on renewamerica.com. They put it up every week. There are several papers in the state that carry it, and 1819 News, that they like it, they'll carry it. They don't carry it every week, but if it's a good one, they'll carry it.
All right. Well, Peter, I went in overtime with you because it was fascinating. So thank you for your time. We're at the end here. So tell everyone where they can find out more about you or follow you on social media.
Well, I don't do a lot of social media, so the only place you can find me is on Facebook, and mostly you'll just see pictures of my grandkids. And other than that, like I said, renewamerica.com is where my column is every week. That's probably the best place to find me. I got kicked off of Twitter a few years ago. I keep thinking I should get back on there now, or X, whatever it is.
Yeah, they'll change the name by the time you finally do that. Well,
Yeah.
you've got your priorities right. That's good. Write for a living and don't do social media. And of course, you have your day job. So thanks again for coming on with us. Hang on, folks. I will be right back.
Sing a song about the heartland, the only place I feel at home. Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone. Sing the rain on the roof.
Yes. Thanks for coming back. It's that time to remind everyone to please subscribe to heartlandjournal.com. I know you're doing it because I see the numbers and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. That is how we grow and keep this content free for you. Now, the Heartland Journal news. Hopefully, y'all got to catch a minute or two of Trump crisscrossing the globe last week, especially the Middle East. Well, with Qatar in the news, seemingly out of nowhere, I'm sure if I went downtown Nashville and asked 100 people to point at little Qatar on a map, they couldn't do it. Maybe that's a big assumption on my part, but I'd be surprised. Anyway, how Qatar bought America. The tiny Gulf nation has spent almost $100 billion to establish its influence in Congress, universities, newsrooms, think tanks, and corporations. What does it want in return? By Frankie Block and Jay Solomon of the Free Press. They do great work at thefp.com, by the way. Check it out or listen to me. That's always cool too. On Wednesday, Donald Trump will travel to Qatar. On his trip, the president will visit Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American military facility in the region, and attend meetings with the ruling Al Thani family. Perhaps he will also thank them for the $400 million gift of a luxury Boeing 747-8 jumbo jet that will reportedly be retrofitted for his use and then transferred to his presidential library. The airplane deal was signed off by Attorney General Pam Bondi. She used to work at a Washington, D.C. lobbying firm that received $115,000 a month from Qatar to fight human trafficking, according to a 2019 contract reviewed by the Free Press. She's not the only one in the administration with ties to the Persian Gulf state. President Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, led lobbying firm Mercury Public Affairs when it represented Qatar's embassy in Washington. FBI Director Kash Patel worked as a consultant for Qatar, though he didn't register as a foreign agent. And then there is Steve Witkoff, President Trump's longtime friend and senior advisor, who is accompanying him on his trip this week. For months now, Witkoff has served as Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, and his name has been floated as a future national security advisor. Witkoff also happens to be a beneficiary of Qatar's largesse. In 2023, Qatar's sovereign wealth fund bought out his faltering investment in New York's Park Lane Hotel for $623 million. Meanwhile, the Trump organization is hard at work planning a new luxury golf resort near Qatar's capital, Doha, in partnership with a Qatari company. Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., will speak next week at the invitation-only Qatar Economic Forum in a session titled Investing in America. If you were just a casual reader of these facts, an ordinary American who doesn't think much about the Middle East after America's traumatic wars of the 2000s, you would think Qatar is a top American ally, a trustworthy partner, and a key hub of international commerce, a country in good enough standing that the President of the United States would use its plane as Air Force One. But Qatar is also a seat of the Muslim Brotherhood, a crucial source of financing to Hamas, a diplomatic and energy partner of Iran, a refuge for the Taliban's exiled political leadership, financier and cheerleader of Palestinian terrorism, and the chief propagandist of Islamism throughout its media superpower, Al Jazeera, which reached 430 million people in more than 150 countries. Key members of Qatar's royal family have made their have made their admiration for Islamism and Hamas specifically very clear. Sheikh Mozar bint Nasser, the mother of Qatar's emir and the chairperson of an educational nonprofit funneling millions into American schools, praised the mastermind of the October 7th, 2023 massacre in Israel, Yahya Sinwar. He will live on, she wrote on X after his death last year, and they will be gone, she said. The question is, how did a refuge of Islamic radicalism, a country criticized by modern-day slave labor, criticized for that, become the center of global politics and commerce? How did this tiny peninsular country of 300,000 citizens and millions of non-citizen migrants workers managed to put itself smack dab in the center of global diplomacy and so successfully ingratiate itself within the Trump administration? You got to read the rest of that column to find out their opinion. But one answer, newly revealed DOJ documents show Doha's increasing efforts in right-wing outlets, including Fox News, to promote favorable narratives. Critics warn of growing Qatari influence after Trump's public praise for the emirate. Qatar's influence has extended into academia, real estate, sports, and even U.S. media, particularly Fox News, mirroring its controversial tactics seen in Israel's Qatargate affair. Documents submitted to the U.S. Department of Justice under the Foreign Agents Registration Act reveal Qatar's deep penetration into the American media landscape, particularly targeting conservative outlets. During the year leading up to the U.S. presidential election, only 10% of lobbying efforts by agents working on behalf of Qatar were directed at conservative-leaning media. However, after Donald Trump's victory, this focus shifted dramatically. Over half of their outreach was aimed at outlets like Fox News, the New York Post, and the Daily Mail. Qatar's goal was clear: to promote favorable narratives about the emirate, known for its complex ties with Hamas and Iran, and position itself as a reliable partner in the eyes of Trump and his administration. They're no dummies. This strategy appears to have yielded results. Okay, that's an ongoing story, I'm sure. Next up, the Environmental Protection Agency's $20 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund, passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2020, is now facing intense scrutiny after internal documents and whistleblower accounts revealed widespread concerns about mismanagement, inflated cost, and lack of oversight. According to documents obtained by the Free Press, there you go again, the $20 billion in taxpayer-funded grants was distributed in the final months of the Biden-Harris administration to just 6 organizations. Reviewers from agencies including the Department of House and Urban Development, The Department of the Treasury and the EPA raised numerous objections to the grant applications, many of which were reportedly ignored. Among the recipients was Power Forward Communities, a nonprofit reportedly linked to former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. The group received a $2 billion grant despite having only $100 in the bank when it applied. Wow, from $100 to $2 billion overnight. Internal reviews show concerns about top executive salaries and vague budget justifications. Well, how you like them apples? Pretty sour. Oh, and this in Federalist.com, because no way you'll hear it on NBC or CBS Nightly News, Biden administration paid $271 million in unemployment checks to millionaires in 2 years. So from your tax-paying dollars to millionaires' pockets in 2 years in unemployment checks. In 2022, the Biden administration paid unemployment compensation to 5,773 people earning $1 million or more, with nearly $58 million going to out-of-work millionaires. It is an average of nearly $10,000 per person. In 2021, a COVID quarantine year with extra dough baked into unemployment, 14,972 people earned $1 million or more receiving unemployment compensation. The Biden administration spent nearly $214 million keeping millionaires fed, paying an average of $14,200 each. Combined the years and individual earnings more than $1 million annually received more than $271 million in unemployment during the first 2 years of the Biden administration. And lastly, something good. President Donald Trump's administration is conducting a full-scale crackdown on baby formula as it puts under scrutiny the link between Chinese labs and the U.S. food and beverage supply. The Department of Health and Human Services and lawmakers on Capitol Hill are sounding the alarm and plan to demand full disclosure on the extent of links to the Chinese Communist Party and U.S.-funded labs. Specifically, HHS officials tell the Daily Mail they are worried that the Chinese intelligence already has access to a slew of information on DNA and biometrics because companies with the data are operating in China. Sources said concerns are growing within the government over China's effort to expand their footprint when it comes to accessing America's data and researching or producing food and beverages that are sold in the U.S. That includes research on infant stools, which means babies' DNA could be accessed by Chinese intelligence. If the Chinese are testing baby formula and the impact on babies, then they are acquiring DNA to do it, an official with HHS told Daily Mail. Yikes, what a dirty job. That is it for this episode. Thank you, Peter Riehm, for running for office in a blue district, first of all, but for covering the reddest of red states when the mainstream media would never so much as send a satellite truck to report on Alabama. I think more interesting news comes out of there than LA, New York, and DC combined on a given night. That actually affects our lives. And if not for him, nobody would from a conservative angle. Keep going, brother. We need you. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of Heartland.com. See you all next time. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God.
Yeah, I've been dreaming of the wild, wild plains, walking where the pine trees dance, where the river runs deep and the birds all sing.
Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.
Myself ever get this far from the heart.